there is no defining between a personal experience and a collective experience. Like, we belong to each other. Everything that is in me is like also felt and experienced around me.
All right, welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Rebekah Giacomantonio. Rebekah, thank you for joining me on What the Fundraising.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. I love the title of this podcast. It's so fun. So I'm really happy to be here.
I hope it always sets a good tone that we're going to have fun, even when we're talking about really hard things, that we're going to bring some like lightness and levity and realness to the conversation. So why don't we just start with you introducing yourself to everyone, sharing a little bit about your background and really what brings you to our conversation today.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, as Mallory said, my name is Rebekah Giacomantonio. I am originally from Maine, which is the unceded territory of the Wabanaki Nation or Confederacy. And I have spent the last decade and a half working in nonprofits, specifically around like ending mass incarceration and decriminalizing our society. I worked a bit with like exoneration and things like that. And that work really brought me to restorative justice and transformative justice work, which is where I spent the bulk of my time within the nonprofit industry. I was also an accidental fundraiser, which is something I've heard you say, Mallory, that I was like, oh my God, yes, that is exactly what happened. Like, oh, hey, you're a good writer. Why don't you just write everything for us forever now? Like, that's part of your job. But anyways, I spent a lot of my time, as I mentioned, doing restorative justice and transformative justice work, which is very much at its core about healing in community, and always felt really moved and interested and invested in like, what would it look like for us to actually heal as collectives, like on the personal, interpersonal, and systemic level, so that we can create the change in the world that we're like hoping for, the vision of the world we want. That was always the piece of the work that most inspired me. And after severe burnout, which like led to a nervous breakdown, I moved to Guatemala, tended some wounds for a few years, and just studied what it would look like to actually build a new world from some communities of indigenous Guatemalans that I lived alongside in that time, and came back to the States, briefly re-entered the nonprofit industry and was like, nope, not for me. and then started cultivating spaces for white folks, white women and non-binary people who crave healing to practice freedom. So that's what I do now.
I have also spent a lot of time in Guatemala, and I had read a little bit about that part of your story, but I'm curious, what did that experience, or what were some of the biggest kind of like light bulb moments that overcame you, both in community there, but also in part of your personal sort of exploration journey, which are, I know, very connected, but
yeah, totally connected. It would be impossible to separate them. But, you know, I was raised conservative evangelical in a very sort of black and white, just toxic church. Not all churches are toxic. Mine was 100% toxic, and left me with some like serious spiritual trauma as well. And so I say that because when I moved to Guatemala, obviously, or maybe not obviously, Guatemala is a very Catholic country. They have really adopted Catholicism. In many places, it's sort of like a syncretist Catholicism, so it like matches with some of the indigenous practices and traditions. But when I moved there, I moved to the second largest city, which is called Shela, and stumbled into a community that was actually like a missionary community, but they were not missionaries from other places. They were all from the town that they lived in. Like, they were all Guatemalans from Shela, just called themselves missionaries, and were like doing Catholic like really liberation theology work, like living among the poor. And I think for me, I had no example of a religious tradition that was like actually about like loving and systems change, and like that was here for the conversations on like injustice and poverty and inequality, and like actually really loving our neighbors and like being in community and taking care of each other and like knowing each other's names and just like all this stuff. And so for me, it was so much of my personal like journey at the time was also like tending lots of old wounds, like burnout, yes, but it was so much more than just my burnout. It was like my whole story collapsing into that moment of the nervous breakdown. And then in healing that required going all the way back and forwards. And, you know, time is not linear, if you ask me. So it was everything all at once. And finding myself in that community was just a salve I didn't know that I needed. And they just showed me so many things. But one of the pieces of it that felt deeply healing on a personal level and also deeply inspiring for me on like my systems change and change work was like, they were just like totally in for mystery and non-duality, and like no one cared about answers. None of them cared about knowing what the right answer to any question is. So I'd come to them with like my boatload of feelings and I'd be like, I need to know, like, what is the meaning of life? Like, that's where I was. I was like really in it. And they were just like, oh, it's just to be present, like just being here. That's it. And I was like, it just blew my mind. I was like, oh, you can just like be, you know? So boil that down. It was like stumbling my way into this community of missionaries that were like liberation theologists, and watching them live life with such a deep commitment to earth and other people and just like being present and loving. That was just like, oh, there's a whole other way of being in the world that I just never knew about.
Wow. What about either your time there, or maybe this goes back to the restorative justice work, has you sort of led you to that conclusion that I know is the foundation of so much of your work, which is that like self and community cannot be separated, particularly when it comes to healing and liberation. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think again, it's many different layers, but one of the moments for me that sort of put me on the trajectory of even being able to be open to the sort of things that I saw and learned in Guatemala was I did a lot of trainings when I lived in New York City. That's where I went to college, and then I stayed there and got trained in restorative justice along the way, sort of in parallel with my bachelor's degree. And I was in a training for restorative justice when someone said like a snide remark about me in the check-in round. So if you're familiar at all with circles or restorative justice, there's a talking piece and you pass the talking piece around and everybody gets to say something. And we do that like sort of to check in. So it'll be like, how are you arriving today? And everybody gets to answer. And there was a person who was sitting next to me. And when she got the talking piece, she said, you know, something like, oh, I'm sitting between the two texters, so I'm really frustrated. And it was total shade, like just total shade on me. And I felt really embarrassed. You know, my dog had been in the hospital that day, so I was like checking in with my partner to see if the dog was okay, you know, whatever. It's not something that I normally would do in a circle, but in that circumstance, that's what I was doing. And I just took it. I was like, it doesn't matter. It was just a small comment. Like, nobody cares. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, just carry on the day. I didn't say anything. And the whole day passed. And at the end of the day, the last person to speak in our checkout round, like, was moved to tears and started like having this visible reaction. And she said, harm happened this morning and no one said anything about it. And I just feel like the energy in the space was off and it made it really hard for me to trust the process, whatever. And she was talking about that one remark that person made for me. And I, in the moment, was like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just me that was hurt. Like, nobody cares. And the whole day had been off for everybody in that circle, but no one said anything except for this one person because of that one comment that the person sitting next to me had said. And we spent the next like 2 hours just processing this one sentence and how it affected all of us in the space. And that was when I realized, like, there is no defining between a personal experience and a collective experience. Like, we belong to each other. Everything that is in me is like also felt and experienced around me. And we all have different experiences of that thing, and our truths and experiences of that moment matter, and they're different and they're textured and they belong, they like are worthy of being heard. And we all have an experience when one of us does. And so, and that was sort of for me the beauty of like restorative justice work, is that like you can feel the moment when the people who are in conflict start to see each other for the first time, as they start to see themselves in each other for the first time, and the space just changes. The like energy is just, it's unbelievable. So anyways, being in that and experiencing before I could, verbalize it, experiencing our mutual belonging, and then seeing in Guatemala with all of my like stuff, like I was just raw. I was completely raw. Like, I was just an exposed human, like a naked mole rat. I don't even know how to say it. Like, I had absolutely no filters. Like, everything was just stripped. And so I was just watching the Guatemalans like live in a way that was in alignment with this thing, that like this understanding that they belong to each other, which I had felt only in the context of restorative justice practices. So knowing, like, experiencing it and then like seeing it lived out, I was like, everything needs to change. Everything needs to change conceptually, how we think about healing. Like, we belong to each other, and it's going to change. And the world that we're trying to bring in as people in social justice work or community work or change work or whatever you call it, like nonprofit, whatever it is, like the world we want to live in will require that we remember we belong to each other and start working from that knowledge, rather than from like the individualism that we're conditioned to, live out as part of, dominant culture in the United States.
So there are a few different ways that we could sort of take this conversation. I mean, I really appreciate what you shared, and I really appreciate that story. And I'll be honest, like, until right now, I think I could probably pull like a handful of experiences like that, but that I've never thought about or further consciously, at least, or sort of called out what was happening in the room, or what wasn't happening because things like that had happened. But I'm really curious, we've talked a lot on this show about sort of the structural challenges that keep us apart, or that make us forget that we belong to each other. But what do you think, like on an individual level, you talk about in your work a lot embodiment, and maybe even before we define embodiment, like what do you define as like disembodiment? Is that, I don't even know if that's the right word, but like, what is like, how do you describe like the disconnect, the disassociation kind of that we have found ourselves in? And then we can maybe think about like, what does that mean in terms of where we go?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're really familiar with what disembodiment looks like, actually, because it's everywhere. I mean, and we know it. We're talking about it, like, oh, I drank too much coffee today and now I'm like jittery. But then as they're doing it, they're drinking more coffee. Like we've all had that moment at the cafe or at the banquet or at the conference where someone's like, oh man, I've had too much coffee, but I'm like, but they're pouring themselves another cup, you know, and there's this like, there's a part of them that realizes their body is saying absolutely not. And then there's just the, I'm doing it like, I'm just on muscle memory. I'm not actually here. Like maybe I don't even actually feel it. I just get the sense that I've had too much coffee, or I don't even know, but like, we see it all the time. People saying one thing and doing another, or just like whenever we like see people saying something and then doing something else, right? You have to be out of alignment or out of your body to be verbally recognizing something and embodying and like with your body doing something else. Or, you know, another example is like our bodies will show you. So like if we have really dry skin, or our hair is dry, or, you know, our nails are breaking, like the skin, if our like skin is cracking, like that is telling me that like that person's not in their body, because their body is telling them like, I'm not well, like I need some love, like I need to put some lotion on my hands, you know, like I need, you know, get some collagen or calcium, like whatever, like I need something here. And it's clear to us, we can see that in other people, but they can't see it in themselves because they're actually not there. And then there's like some other telltale signs, which is something that I've experienced like more personally, is like, especially within the nonprofit sector, like I have worked with a lot of EDs. I'm in a position where I've been hired by board members more than once, or hired because board members wanted me there. And so EDs and I often have a sort of stressful relationship, because the board has been like, this girl, we need Rebekah, we need Becca here to do some things. And so I have this relationship, but what'll happen, especially with EDs, and oftentimes with other folks as well, but you'll see folks in leadership or folks in the nonprofit industry, like who have gone to the workshops, they've read all the books, they've done the webinars, you know, like the professional development, the self-care, the DEI, all this stuff. And then, and they'll actually be teaching other people, right? Like sometimes they're actually onboarding other staff members, or like teaching you. You know, in my case, like I'll be receiving lessons from people, and then I'll see them in another context, like do the very thing they just taught me not to do. Right. And when you bring it to them, they're like, I would never do that because that's just not my values. Like I would just never do a thing like that. And it's like, well, I just saw you, like there's an email, I could show you the receipts, like you did it, you know, like you did the thing that you said that we shouldn't do. Like I can show it to you. And if you get to a point where you actually do show them what they've said or done, it's like they have seen a ghost, like they don't recognize themselves in their text. And that's when, you know, like they're just not there. They're just not present. And so, yeah, I mean, I hope that's a helpful answer to that question.
Yeah, it is. And I'm thinking about, so I mean, I feel like there's so many different, like layers and levels maybe of like disembodiment, but I'm curious, like when folks are trying to become a more embodied leader, what do you recommend as sort of the first step? Because I can imagine that it's a scary process. And there are a lot of reasons why it's happening, right? That feel more comfortable in the moment, perhaps. So how do people start to like dip their toe in this work?
Yeah. You know, one of the things I talk about in the group that I run, which is called the Interdependence Incubator, is that we have been told that mindfulness and meditation and embodiment, like all these things have to like look a certain way, and you have to like sit in a certain position for a certain amount of time and do this certain kind of breathing and then move through these specific postures and like all this stuff. And it's like, let's just no. First of all, most of that stuff was created by folks with a male anatomy and like male body, male physiology. So the postures that we're getting into are actually meant for that specific physiology, which is not to say that folks with a female physiology can't be comfortable in them, but it's just like, just hold that into consideration, right? Like the history of yoga and mindfulness and meditation is a fascinating one for another conversation. But basically what started out as like a women's dance practice, basically, or just like movement practice, got co-opted by men, and then women were excluded from it. And then it became what it is today. That's a very oversimplified version of the story. But what I'm saying is like, it was created rigid with these rigid structure, with a rigid structure on purpose. And that is not going to work for every body. And when I say that, I mean like every space body, right? Like you, to start becoming an embodied leader, just like breathe, like just pause for just take one deep breath a day, you know, and be there for that breath. Right. And then you can build out, like maybe you do it a couple times a day. I always tell the folks in the incubator, like set a timer on your phone that just says breathe. And just when the timer on your phone goes off, just take a deep breath. That's it. Just one deep breath, whatever posture you're in. Like, I don't care if you're laying down or doing a handstand or whatever you're doing, like just take a deep breath and be there for it. And it really is like, it sounds oversimplified, but you get this, like, it just becomes part of your practice. And then all of a sudden, every time you're taking a deep breath, you're not sighing anymore. You're taking a deep breath and you're there for the deep breath. Right. And it just builds from there. Like, oh, can I actually just like put my phone down while I pet my dog? Can I just like be petting my dog? Just like me and my dog petting, just like having a loving like a tender moment here. And maybe I can just look out the window for a second, right? And like notice the tree. And it's these like little things that we keep doing them. They're attractive. We're going to want more. They're very addictive. I will tell you that. The warning label, like petting your dog and like actually paying attention to the pets. It's a real delight, and you're going to want more of it. Just a warning. You're going to want to keep petting your dog with your whole mind and your whole body. So yeah, that's how I would start. That's how I like coach my clients to just begin where you are. Like forget the rules about time and posture. Just be in your body for like a second, as many times as you can.
There's something that you said that I am thinking about now, which is our desire. I think you said like, this might seem really simple. Yeah. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately with practices like this, around how if they don't have like a hustle mentality to them, or like all the guidelines or all the tips and all the things that we have this narrative, like, oh, that's just too easy. It couldn't be impactful, but it's actually for that exact reason that it is.
Yeah. 100%. We forget that like all this hustle and like schedules and computers is like really new for humans. Like most of our history, we did work really hard and then we chilled super hard, right? Like we spend a lot of time just like sitting by the fire, like chilling out, like dancing or breathing or, you know, whatever. We didn't always have technology and like all the information. We have way too much information right now. It's like so many stimuli and inputs and like all the stuff. Like just keep it simple. Like we are very like complex beings and living in a complex world. Like even the natural world is so complex, but like we can actually just tune in and just like be with it in simple ways, and like we'll truly be able to access that complexity and like have like get into the flow better, you know, just by like simply entering. Then we're in it. It's like the part of Finding Nemo where the turtles are like in the whatever that thing is, and you have to like psych yourself up to like do a really simple thing, which is just like swim into this flow. Right. But then you're like, you got into it and now you're like, oh man, all I gotta do is swim in.
Except
maybe it's more complicated than the movie. I don't know.
Well,
I haven't seen it in a while.
It's so interesting, though, that you said that, because one of the things I was wondering about is, is part of the reason. So like disembodiment and just all of the things we do to cope with life, you've experienced really challenging dynamics in the nonprofit sector. So have I. So have probably every single listener, be it from bullying to like toxic leadership structures to all these different things, to harassment and abuse and all of that. And I would say, I'm going to speak personally and not make an assumption or generalization here. I would say personally for me, I think when I stayed disembodied, it made me feel like I could survive the other things. And when I would have those moments, those glimpses of full immersion in my life, full presence, full things, in some ways, they really freaked me out because it made it so clear all the other pieces that weren't working. And so how do you support folks around that? Or I think one of the things I really respect and appreciate about your work is the non-binary nature that, like you said something on our very first call where you were like, the first step is to like recognize that, there's this tension, and then you can still make whatever choice you want to make. But just like, and so talk to me a little bit about like how you and your community grapple with that piece.
Yeah. I mean, I think one primary thing, and I was just reading Nonprofit AF by Boulay, champion of making jokes about the nonprofit industry and saying important things. And he wrote somewhere like, we take the work seriously, but not ourselves. And I think there's a piece of that feels really resonant, because my whole thing is like, we really need to start playing. We just need to start playing and experimenting and trying things on and seeing how they feel and taking a note. How did this thing feel? Like I tried this thing on, I tried embodiment on, I tried to take a deep breath, and I was like immediately hit with like way too much. And then we just write that down. Like, yep, did a deep breath, felt too many feelings, went back to disembodiment, and just like, that is what it is. And to your point, like holding the both and is like absolutely primary first block of the work that we do. Is like, we need to understand that like, we're not going to have, like, there is no truth, right? There is no right. There is no wrong. There is just what is. And every moment has its own unique set of conditions and opportunities. And all that we are invited into is to like be in the moment and to make a choice, right? And to see how that choice goes. Does it work? Do I feel better? Do I feel more connected? Was it a protective choice? Was it a proactive choice? Was it value aligned? Was it where I want to be or how I want to be? And if it wasn't, or if it didn't bring me closer to the world that I want to live in, is that because that's what my capacity is right now? And I actually don't have capacity to make another decision. And that is like totally real and valid and true. If that's true for you, that is like true in that moment, right? But it may not be true the next moment. So that's the beauty of like coming back and being like, it is true that I want to live an embodied life. And it is also true that like right now, I can't do it because I have X, Y, and Z thing. So maybe being disembodied keeps me safe for now. And like, that is okay. But tomorrow might be different, right? I think we get really set in like, this is the way that it is. This is how it's going to be. Like, there's no other option, like one way or my way or the highway. Like there's only one way. This is a one-way road, and here I am, and that's it. And, with my clients, the work is like, everything is everything. Lauryn Hill, right? Like everything is everything all the time. And so how can we try on and play with just holding that truth, right? Like holding that idea. I just need to get comfortable with the idea that maybe there isn't a right answer here. And my clients can spend weeks, months just playing with that, right? What would it feel like right now if I just accepted that there was no right answer, right? Or there was no one truth? What if I just felt into that in this moment, in the beginning? And maybe I play with that for, months before I get anywhere else. There's no other way. There's nowhere to go, right? Except to just continue being. So it gets a little, it's beyond. I find a lot of times that I don't have enough words to describe what we're doing or how we're doing it. But it is really just getting comfortable with mystery and leaning in. Like, I'm not going to know right now, but I'm going to keep waking up and keep making a choice. Like, I understand that I have many choices here, and even getting to a place where you recognize that you're choosing to stay disembodied because it's keeping you safe is a step towards embodiment, right? Because like, my body and my being right now is keeping me safe. And I'm going to honor and respect and value that I am being kept safe right now. Like, that is huge. And I'm going to be aware of it. And that is so countercultural. Like, you're doing great. If you got there, like, you nailed it. Amazing.
I could not agree more. My coach certification is in something called energy leadership. And there are these 7 levels of energy, and the lowest levels are filled with mostly catabolic energy. The highest levels are filled with anabolic energy. So like a level 1 is like really like victimhood, martyrdom, perfectionism, judgment, black and white thinking, a lot of what you're talking about. And the like higher levels of anabolic are joy, connection, mutual benefit, co-liberation, like those pieces. And but what I say a lot is like, no energy level is bad. Like, there are moments in our life where we want to call in that level 1 protective energy because we are so tender. Maybe we just need to like have a full pity party for ourselves,
Absolutely.
you know? And I do, but it's all about conscious choice and just not being triggered involuntarily or in a disembodied way into that level 1, but to choose it is so fundamentally different. It like just at its core is so fundamentally different than experiencing that without that choice. I'm curious, and I have a feeling that this is not going to make sense, but I'm going to try.
I'm here for it.
Because I feel like one of the things that, and I remember when I got yoga teacher certified in Guatemala, actually, this thing I kept asking, which was how to find the balance between social change work, which inherently feels judgmental to a certain extent, right? Because you are saying this thing is wrong. This thing that is happening in our society, it is wrong. So like, there's judgment there, right? Even when we say this culture, this nonprofit culture is toxic, this thing, like there are all these, like, I feel like accepted forms of judgment. And then what I found to be so challenging was tapping in and out of that to that like acceptance, gray, it's all gray, like any, lots of choices, anything is possible. I do it in different ways in my work now, but I just remember asking so often, like, okay, but like, how do I accept something that like is wrong? And they would be like, well, there is no universal truth. And I would be like, well, like really, because like, it feels like these certain things in society are actually like very wrong.
Right.
So how do we grapple with that?
Yeah, it's messy. And the thing is, like, we don't live in a culture where being messy is acceptable. Like, we don't live in that. We don't live in that world. We can. We're like, I'm like, let's build it. If we build it, they will come, right? Like, I want to live in a world where I can show up with just questions, right? Like, here are the list of questions I have, right? And not be expected to answer any of them. Like, can we just be in our bodies with our journals and our yoga mats, or like whatever it is for you, like some dance music. Like sometimes I have I'm like feeling most aligned and like alive in the questions when I'm like breaking it down to Diamonds by Rihanna. Like it's just it's just everything. But I'll say, like, you know, I was just listening to your podcast with Ria Wong, and y'all were talking about how like you're just not going to be liked by everybody at some point. Like you're mentioning that. And I think for me, like one of the pieces that I also workshop with my folks is like you're just not gonna, like, people are just going to feel a way about you being open to multiple truths. Like people, like the reality is that much of the work towards like social justice or liberation and systems change, like nonprofit, whatever you call it, like we've also gotten like really polarized is what I'm saying. And you're right, like we've made decisions. This is good and this is bad. And some of those decisions are important, like mass incarceration, bad, right? Like police violence, bad, you know? And where I think that the non-duality comes in, even making those statements, is like, it is true. Like my dad's a police officer, right? So I became politicized. But my uncle is also a police officer, and I spent a lot of time like in the precinct growing up, just like at work with my dad. And so I know a lot of police officers like really intimately. And there are pieces of that knowledge that like I can't unknow or unexperience, right? Like I will always remember those people and know them as like people who believed, perhaps foolishly, I'm ready for that conversation. People who believed that they were really trying, that they were protecting and serving, and that their training enabled them to protect and serve. And I can pull up dozens of articles and lived experiences that prove that the work that they were doing was the opposite. Like they were not protecting people, and they were not serving people. And I can get really, really angry and like look at those statistics and be like, all right, this is what we need to do. And I can get a bunch of people behind me who think, yes, this is the plan. Like this is the one truth. This is the one way of handling this situation. And there are no, like everything else is trash. So I'm even going to polarize myself against other organizations doing work in the same field, because this is the way and the truth and the light. And anybody who does anything different is like just not even worth the air that they breathe. And that is not liberation. That's not what liberation looks like. That's not the world that I'm moving towards. And so I navigate these spaces, and always have navigated, you know, the spaces that I'm in, aware that that people are not going to agree with me, right? People are not going to agree with with me holding more questions than answers, particularly in the field that I was in, which was restorative justice, transformative justice, which overlaps with, you know, talking about mass incarceration and criminal justice system. And non-duality is not a conversation that we're having as a sector or a movement, right? And it really, for me, is the crux of the work. Like nothing like that is where I begin my work and journey, is understanding that like multiple things are true about any given situation. And one of those truths is that there are going to be people who think that me holding multiple truths is trash and like not great. And I know in my body, I remember what it felt like to be in that polarizing place, because that's where I was. I mean, I like was so hateful and bitter and angry and resentful, and it just, you know, it just destroyed me. It literally destroyed me. My nervous system shut down. I was not able to function the same way. And I really believe that that is the natural end of all that agony and suffering. And we're seeing burnout happen everywhere. It's happening everywhere. And nobody knows what to do. So we're just like, people are leaving this work, movement work, in droves. You know, they're going anywhere else and they're just getting their corporate job and just surviving, you know, like finding a place that pays them well, right? So that they can just like numb their way through and, you know, do their obligatory donations here and there. But that's not what I want. That's not what I want for us. I want us all to be here with our whole selves, like making change and creating a world where every single body is free. And when I say every single body, I mean police officer bodies too. I mean, hopefully they're not police officers, then they're something else, but they are there. Like those people who formerly wore police uniforms are also in a world where everybody is free. And so what is it going to take for us to get there? And I don't have an answer. I have a lot of questions, and I am ready to sit in those questions and just like explore and try things on and have them fail, right? Like sometimes I try things on and it's just a complete flop and it did the exact opposite, and I have to do lots of apologies and learn a lot more before I can try something else on again. I think maybe that was like a long-winded answer to your question.
No, I really appreciate everything that you said. And yeah, it actually leads me somewhere that I was hoping to go, which is the accountability piece. Because I think this is another thing that, you know, I'm having to catch myself in too. Like the, you know, first of all, I will just say like, you know, I'm so sorry to hear about your like health experience and just your experience in the sector. And I share so many pieces of that too, like, and the way it just wreaked havoc on my body when like my mind wouldn't connect. Like it was like my body finally got so loud. It was just like, if you are not going to listen to all the subtle ways we have been telling you this is not okay, then we're just going to literally like destroy your nervous system until you can't feel your hands. And then you probably can't send another email.
Yes. Yeah. So many signs. There were so many signs.
There were so many signs. But you know, it's so sad to me, or it's so unfortunate to me that, you know, it takes, you know, I'm sure you do too. I hear so many stories like that. Right. And so it's just like that to me, you know, breaks my heart. And I think also, you know, demonstrates the necessity of the work and the piece that like, yeah, like I think what you're talking about is really scary. I'm just going to say that. Yeah. And I think that the thing we have to remember is that the reality is also really scary. Yeah. And it's that whole like devil that we know, devil that we don't know. You know, I hear people say all the time, like, that sounds so uncomfortable. I'm like, well, how comfortable on a scale of 0 to 10 do you feel in this present moment?
Yes.
Like, like you're not very comfortable. So it's like, yes, this is really uncomfortable, but also we're suffering, like you're suffering now. And so that is just something I kind of wanted to like double click on for folks who maybe had some of those feelings around like that reality sounds really scary, is just that it's an unknown potential pain being compared to our very real current pain. And this accountability piece to me feels related in so many ways, because you know, and the failure piece that you talked about, like it's so interesting just thinking through that as you were talking. I was like, wow, like when I was in that other space, like when I was leading that organization, when I was trapped in my own martyrdom, when I was like that leader, a failure or a critical feedback or that board member call, it like rocked my whole world. It shot my whole nervous system. It was so hard. And I think about how over the last year or two, I've heard much harder feedback, like much harder feedback. But the difference is that, one, I really value that feedback. Like because I felt in more integrity in the action that I took or the thing that I tried, or more consciousness around it. And I also was not so desperate to prove myself right, but instead was like, I am trying to show up in this way. And yeah, it might be wrong. Like, I'm taking the information available to me at this time, and sometimes that's going to be right, and sometimes that's going to be wrong, or sometimes it's going to cause harm, and sometimes it's going to be beneficial. And just holding more, it's interesting the impact that it has had on me in, I think, my ability to take accountability in a way that I think if I had tried to explain that to myself 7 years ago, I would have been like, oh, like, you can't do that. But for some reason, it just feels like a part of a process, as opposed to some stamp of what I am or what I'm not.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, here's the thing, like, particularly in the US, like, particularly white folks are conditioned to seek comfort at all costs and to avoid discomfort, right? And it's not just that we like seek comfort and avoid discomfort. It's that we seek comfort and avoid discomfort because we were literally given zero skills, like no skills to be uncomfortable, right? And it's not forced upon us. That's privilege. Like, we get to opt out of discomfort. So like, this reality that we're living in is like not great for anyone, right? But it is like really, really awful for folks that don't have my social position as a white woman, right? Like, it is terrible. And it has been terrible for those folks since they were born, right? So they didn't have a choice. They couldn't opt out of discomfort, right? And I'm thinking particularly of my colleagues who are Black women. Like, they couldn't, there was no like, yes, please, I would like to take the comfortable path. Like, let me just opt in. Like, that was just not an option like it was for folks of a different social position. And class matters here too. Like, I'm going to name that, right? Like, it's not just race. It's like also class matters. But so there is like a huge piece of this work for us, for me and the folks that I work with in my program, the incubator, like, is just figuring out how to be able to settle my nervous system, which is why embodiment is so important, because I don't even know what's happening in my body. Like, there is no way I'm going to be able to handle it and like name it and like settle it enough so that I can sit there and receive feedback, right? Like, if I can't even name the thing that's happening, if I can't show up to that thing, forget about it. Which is why we see so many folks go through trainings and workshops, and they've read the books and they can quote it back to you and they can tell you all of these things. And then they do these like egregiously harmful things, right? I had a boss once tell me, a white woman who was the ED, tell me to mentor my colleagues on how to be more professional and their communication patterns. And my colleagues were two Black women who like were fresh out of college. So there was an age difference and there was a race difference. And I just looked at her and I was like, I'm just going to repeat back what you asked me right now. Like, I'm just going to reflect back this question. And, you know, this was the same boss. This boss was so disembodied that she was like, yeah, I don't see the problem there. When she would just go on about how other organizations were like totally harmful, like, you can just imagine. But my point is, like, she had no skills. So her body, upon hearing me reflect that back to her, went into defense mode immediately and denied. Like, that didn't happen because that thing that you're reflecting back to me doesn't match with how I see myself. So I'm just going to reject that it even happened and basically tell you that you're wrong and make you question your perspective, which is like, hello, gaslighting. Like, And it happens all the time, right?
Mm.
But all that to say, like, the work is just being able to first accept failure. Like, we're gonna fail. It's gonna keep happening over and over and over again for the rest of our lives. And it's good. It's growth. It's change. Like, the butterfly was a caterpillar before, right? So just let it happen and see how you can just like, okay, I'm going to fail. And when I fail, here's what I need to do to be able to stay present in that moment. And like, you know, we make strategic plans. We make all these different plans. Like, we never plan for failure in our relationships and in our work. And we're just gonna mess up. And when we do, we should have a plan, right? We should know, hey, when I mess up, here's what I do. I will attack myself. Like, externally, I will bow down and just be like, you're so right. Like a dog who's done something wrong. Like, oh my God, I'm the worst. Like, I'm the terrible human. But I don't say any of that out loud. I just like bow down and like cower. And internally, there's just like a shame shitstorm that's just like twirling around. And sorry, I don't know if I can swear. There's a shame storm. You can edit that version. You know, whatever. But like, knowing this is what happens in my body. Like, I'm going to write it down. Like, someone comes to me with accountability. I know this is what I do. And so that when it happens, I can be like, oh, hey, like, there you are. Like, I see you. We'll get to you later. We're just going to like put you aside for a second. I'm going to be present in this conversation. I'm going to take it in. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to just return. I actually think about this a lot. And I wrote an article for community-centric fundraising on this very topic because I was like, people need a guide. Like, I needed a guide. People need a guide. And here it is. Here's what's worked for me. You know, like, keep this and have it so that when you mess up, you know, okay, here's what I got to do. Until especially for those of us that are like still in disembodiment, like, having that steps and that plan to move through makes it so much easier for us when we can't really be in our body to be like, okay, I know this is going to happen. So first I do this, and then I do this, and then I do that, and then I do that. And then as we become more embodied and more able to like be inside our body, we can trust our intuition. We can trust our body to help us move through it more organically. But in the meantime, absolutely have a plan. Because you are not like me. If you're like me, you weren't given any skills to handle conflict or discomfort or accountability. And without a map, we are lost and likely to make harm much worse than it needed to be. So make it easy. Make a map, have a map on hand, and then just keep using that map until you can be in your body enough to be in the moment and move organically from there. But I think, you know, just expecting failure and knowing what happens in your body when that happens and just like having a plan for it is some of the best things we can do, especially for folks that live in bodies that have a social position or access to things that other bodies don't. Like, we don't know what we don't know. And that means that we're going to do stuff that's harmful. It's just going to happen. So plan for it.
Okay. I could keep talking to you forever, but we want to get you out into the Austin sunshine. So tell everyone, thank you so much for this conversation, and tell everyone where they can find you and the best way to connect with you, and also how folks know if they're like the right people, or, you know, that they know that this community is going to be the right fit for them.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. LinkedIn is my playground. I don't have really any other social media that I use, but I'm there. And you can just search my name, which you should probably look at the show notes for because it's really long, kind of hard to spell. But yeah, search my name in LinkedIn and you'll find me, and I'm there a lot. Please send me a message or a connection request. I'm like down for community always, and building relationships and just answering questions. And that's really the best place with all the information that you need is on the LinkedIn. The Interdependence Incubator is for white women and non-binary people who have done the work, have like engaged with DEI work, are trying to learn and feel still just like overwhelmed. They're feeling like they're burning out. They're just like, there is just like so much information and so much to be doing. And I don't really know where to even begin. If you're there, or if you've been trying to begin and you're just hitting lots of roadblocks and walls and just feeling still like living a value aligned life is hard and maybe even impossible, then the Interdependence Incubator is for you. And we do all of the things that we've touched on in this conversation and more to sort of just like, rewire our neural pathways and get inside our bodies and build a world where everybody can be free through the practice of freedom, really.
Awesome. And I will include links to all of that below, as well as links to the article that you wrote for community-centric fundraising as well. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for this conversation.